Welcome to the Global Rewire podcast. Today's guest is Myron Scholes, an economist who needs no introduction because his name is on a famous option pricing model. He is a Nobel Laureate. He's also an Anderson Institute board member. And today, my co host, Anderson CEO Fabio Nattalucci, and I are going to talk to him about artificial intelligence and uncertainty.
Okay, so let me start with a big question, right? So, what do you think, Myron, is so unique about AI, right? There's been a lot of other technological improvements in the past, like the Industrial Revolution, electricity, internet. How this is different from the past? Along what dimension we should think about AI versus the past?
Well, first of all, it's not a shock. It's going to be evolving over time. So it's going not to be instituted initially and instantaneously. But basically, I look at innovation in our society and how we use things as a way to do things faster, more individualized, and more flexibly. So that when you compare it to these other revolutions you talk about, how do they make our lives, making things faster, going inputs to output faster, making it more idiosyncratic and more individualized and more flexible? So basically, I see in my area in finance that it will be revolutionary in the sense that it will move us more and more to a product, away from a product focus to a solutions focus. Right now, most of finance, when we think about it, is a product focus. We say this is a great supermarket. So take from the shelf all our mutual funds, our investment solutions, our programs that we have for you. And that is not individualized. In the future, we will see AI enabling us to move to a solutions focus, which is more like a catering service. You talk with AI, you talk with AI system, it understands more of your individual needs, and then it would address for you a program which allows you to create a solution more to your liking, just the same way as you talk to a caterer about what type of dinner you want to produce for your guests that are going to be coming to your home. And so that flexibility element is allowing you to be dynamic and change your mind and do things faster and create more individualization and more flexibility. So basically, innovation in finance has occurred because of the need for speed, the need for individual solutions, and also the need for flexibility. All the functions of finance are static, but the institutional rigidities and the institutional ways we do things can be enhanced by using AI and AI technology. So getting back to your question, we talk about our society generally. How does it increase speed? How does AI allow for more individualization? How does AI allow for more flexibility? That's the major question. These other innovations did that.
So you have talked, Myron, specifically about AI and uncertainty. So the point that AI can process data, can increase dimensionality, reduce error. The question is, can AI help reduce uncertainty? I think that's a relevant question. There's so much heightened policy uncertainty now, whether this is trade policies, geopolitics, climate change. How to think about the two?
There's a conundrum in innovation. I say innovation creates speed and individualization and flexibility. But at the same time, you have the other hand, the governance structures. They want to be slow, regularized, and inflexible. So you're talking about society being slow, regularized, and inflexible. Why? Because basically the governance structure is trying to create a way in which we have order or governance on our innovations. And the problem is, under uncertainty, innovation must lead infrastructure. You can't put the ordnance troops up in the front line prior to having the warriors. do the fighting. Governance always follows innovation because of uncertainty. But the greater the uncertainty, the more uncertain it is that the innovation will be successful. So therefore, it's very expensive to put all the infrastructure in place prior to knowing the innovation will be successful or the probability of the innovation being successful. And therefore, as a result of that, greater uncertainty means you wait. You wait and see whether it's the case that the innovation will be successful. However, the problem is that the more uncertainty there is, then the more the cheaters come in, or people that game the system to come in and cheat others using this innovation. So AI is in a conundrum right now because basically we've had great innovations and applications of AI. It's also under uncertainty, have a great lacking of infrastructure to actually govern this innovation. And as a result of that, we have a lot of new innovations or new cheaters that come in to game against the innovation. So basically, our society has to always balance innovation with governance. And how to do that is a very delicate and difficult situation under uncertainty.
Myron, I was interested in your comments about how it'll be solution oriented. One thing about financial services is they don't offer consumers effective hedges. So I remember in like an oil shock a while back, I had 3 boys, all needed to go to practice. We had a minivan. To fill it up, it was $50. And so will we get to a world where I can buy a hedge, for God's sakes, against my gasoline costs, or a hedge during 2022 and 23 against my giant food bill? Do you see something like that happening in financial products as a result of AI?
Well, we saw that happening on the institutional front. You have a great question. For example, in the when the Black-Scholes model and technology was developed, we then had a movement to having new financial instruments and contracts come into place, optionality. We have futures markets, which allowed for risk transfer, okay, and the idea of transferring risk. As a result of that, Craig, you had a change in the way financial institutions operated. You saw a great revolution in financial institutions. What happened was that prior to these innovations, okay, in the options market, the technology, and the futures market, it was the case that most of financial institutional business was called an agency business. Basically, what would happen is that corporations wanted to issue debt or bonds, and insurance companies wanted to buy bonds. So all the intermediary would do, just as in your housing market today, is have an agent. They would say, okay, here's bonds for sale. You want to buy them. And that was very slow. It was not individualized, and it was inflexible because you just bought product. As a result of that, with the new technology that was developed, institutions then decided to buy talent who understood mathematics, could understand options technology, could understand building a solution for a client. And what the institutions went to, Goldman Sachs, Salomon Brothers, JP Morgan, what they did say to the client, what do you want, corporation? The corporation would say, I want this is what I like. And then the institution would then go and start producing that. Just as they would say, this is the price it'll cost you that contract, just as a manufacturer builds you a car, quotes you a price, and then goes build it. So what the financial institutions did is go and build that product, and they would sell some pieces of it to an insurance company and package it that way. They would then package it in other ways for other institutions. You would get what you wanted. The other institutions would get what they wanted. And as a result, they would have to hedge the residual. Okay. And then they would produce and manufacture that particular solution. That has not gravitated down as much to the individual, when it comes to financial services, it's really very prevalent now in designing financial contracts and solutions for corporations, just the same way as Anderson might want to fashion solutions for their high net worth clients. But all of that will gravitate more down to the individual and become more individualized. Now, your question of whether you can hedge your contract is you have to find a buyer on the other side. And for very small contracts, it might not be possible to do that hedging. But think about what the idea of Bitcoin or stable coins or coins such as that, and having digitized finance, which is an evolution. With digitized finance, it might move us closer to being individualized or more flexible to be able to change and faster. If you wanted to get a contract to hedge your oil for your car, gasoline for your car, it might take you a lot of time to find someone on the other side. And with the sizing that you had, you would not be able to do that for a $10 or $50 contract. So the interesting issue is how we can move it down to the individual is cost reduction, because can it be the case that innovation occurs if you can do it the same or lower cost? And you try to think of the focus of being the solution for the client and not the product. So individual institutions and sell products. Businesses sell products now, but basically that will move more to a solution. When my mother was in the department store business in northern Canada, they sold boots to miners. And there was one size boot. That one size boot had to fit miners. So the miner with small feet had to stuff their boot with socks or other things so the boot wouldn't fall off when they went into the mine. The miner with large feet had to go to another profession because they couldn't fit into the boot. Their innovation was go to the manufacturer and say, give me 3 sizes of boots, large, medium, and small. And they scooped up the market in their small town because basically they can now innovate and have more individualized solutions. So in the future, with 3D printing and AI and that, you will be able to know that my right foot is, say, 43.5 and my left foot is 43.6. So I wouldn't have to buy the larger size shoes that fit both feet. We print for each foot. So it's individualization. What is it for me? That's what happens in all of our society, and moving down and handling what our needs are, more of a solutions focus away from a products focus. The same thing is happening with manufacturing. What we have is manufacturing. If you know something for certain, you build in hardware. That's the lowest cost solution. But that means you can change. If you want more flexibility, then basically the cost of change is high. But if you can make it more in software, which is more expensive to do, that allows for changes under uncertainty, that allows for dynamics, that allows for flexibility.
I want to go back for a second to the issue of AI and uncertainty. Right? So, Myron, you're called like AI a farmer, not a hunter. So a collector of information that is mostly going to land at the center of the distribution, if you want. But we know that there are tail risks, right? We have seen the GFC, we have seen COVID. In fact, even in climate with more increased frequency. So the question is like, can AI eliminate risk entirely? Can we teach them about tail, for example? How should I think about that issue?
Everything in life is a model. Okay, every business is a model. A model means that it's doing business under uncertainty, right? If we knew it for certain, as I said before, you'd build it exactly in hardware, keep producing the same thing all the time. But under uncertainty, which everything is in life, changes all occur, many changes, big changes, new innovations occur that are competing, new things occur. Then the question is, under that, we have a model. And every model has an error to it by definition, or it wouldn't be a model. It would be an exact replication. So everything we do is a model. We have a logical representation in our head or business of a physical process that we're going to develop. So this is called in manufacturing, it's called a digital twin. The idea that we have a simulation of a physical process that we want to employ. That simulation helps us by perturbating it, making a better design of the actual physical process. The model has an error to it. The simulation has an error, obviously, because you have a model, and intuition is a model. When you have a business decision to make, it's intuition. You have a model. That is a huge error. But then as you learn more, you can now flesh out the model and add dimensions to the model and reduce the error of your model. So you have a mathematical model that is a representation of a logical process, a model that has an error to it. Now, the idea is, how can we use information from the large data sets that we have from history and everything else that we have, the cross-section as well as the time series, spatial and time series, to be able to reduce the error of our model? Now, the way we can, when we reduce the error of our model, AI will give us information to reduce our intuition to more systematic and get rid of a lot of the errors that we have in our model. So that is great for AI because it uses historical data, use spatial data to reduce the error of our model. And if we reduce the error of our model, we can increase its dimensionality. In other words, instead of having one variable, we can have lots of variables, and that would reduce the error of our model even further, realizing, however, you'll never completely eliminate the error of the model because that would, in my view, somewhat be impossible. And one of the reasons why that's impossible is because of uncertainty. There's always new information that comes along, and that the distribution of life is not only historical data or spatial data. It's the future and how things evolve and change over time, create new information and new risks. That means that we have to address that new uncertainty that occurs. And there's so much unknown at the time now, unknowns that are going to occur, which create new shocks, new ways that we have to think about things, which means that we're going to have to always address the changes that occur and allow us to either change the dimensionality of our model or recalibrate our model based on these new information sets. How does AI enable us to do things faster because we can address these changes and use it? But it'll always be the case that tails will occur. So creativity, in my view, creativity is looking at the past and being inductive, buying a lot of information from the past, being inductive about looking at spatial relations. But at the same time, the creative person knows when there's exceptions. AI cannot handle the exception because AI is a way in which it gathers and garners data from the past and from the spatial relations. It doesn't know how distributions are changing or risk are changing or uncertainty is changing. And that is what the human being can do. I've always used the analogy of Einstein sitting in his patent office with his physics books and all the data from the past. And he saw things that were inconsistent in Newtonian physics and came up with 3 great papers, which changed the way we thought about relativity and energy and preservation and how things change. And he designed experiments which later were tested that turned out to be correct. And as a result of that, we changed the whole nature of how physics is taught and evolves. So I asked AI systems today, I asked the current ones whether they could have invented the Black-Scholes technology that Craig you referred to previously. And basically, AI came back with the correct answer, said no. They saw things differently from what was in the past and what spatially was there, and we can't do it. That's why human beings are so important. Somehow they can see the exceptions, and creativity is gathering data, but it's also gathering data and knowing when to stop and deduce from the data you gather. So induction first, deduction follows. We can't use a scientific method. The scientific method is wrong.
I worry, Myron, that I worry that there are going to be not enough hunters in this world, and that AI crowds us into the center of the distribution, whether it be a medical diagnosis or assumptions. I'll give you a great example. So, the best story, in my opinion, written about the great financial crisis was about the models they use for subprime default. So, they found this guy down on Wall Street. He took actuarial tables on death and he applied it to mortgage default. And he said, well, nobody dies on the same street. It's just so rare that a bunch of people will die on the same street. So he took that technology and analysis and applied it to mortgage default. And he said, well, as long as we're dispersed around neighborhoods, it'll be fine. But guess what? Lots of people defaulted on the same street. So there, how do we defend ourselves as consumers? And how do we become hunters when this technology is crowding us into the center, whether it be what we pay for car insurance, a medical diagnosis, just about anything? The more this penetrates our world, it seems to me the more we have to fight against it and push against being vulnerable in the center of the distribution.
Well, Craig, you're interesting what you're saying, because most people are worried about the opposite, that basically the farmers are going to be eliminated, in the sense that AI can answer all the questions that a lot of people in the back office and others are doing. In the newspaper business, everyone's thinking that AI will generate all the newspapers and the reporter will have no function. The interesting thing is the idea that now you're saying, no, we got to worry not only about all the farmers disappearing, because AI will take over that, and we'll end up with the Malthusian equivalent of all of us just writing poetry and sitting in our backyard. That's the getting rid of all the farmers. And then you're worrying about the hunters as well. And, I've always thought in life that basically, I read the book by Jared Diamond on guns and the like, and talking about the hunters being driven out by the farmers over time. And I've always wondered where the hunters went, because they were driven away. But once a hunter, you don't disappear, really. You go to another activity and profession. So the interesting thing is, will we have roles for hunters? There'll always be roles for hunters, in the sense that what we'll do is have the hunters will find new ways to hunt, new things to hunt, just as they did. They might have left hunting meat or whatever and bringing it back to the farmers to store their wheat, or the processors to store their wheat. But basically, we will have people innovate and create new things and bring it back to corporations and other things to actually implement. We've had that in the drug area. We've got so expensive to pass the FDA, getting through the governance structure, that Merck and other companies, what they do is then they buy these startups and they go, that are going to be successful, go to the second and third trials, and then basically they move it through the FDA. The hunter who develops the drugs and that, which will help us for the future, has no skills in going through the governance structure. And there's a huge economy of scale and scope in doing that. And basically Merck or other other companies take that to the next level. So it's where the hunters hunt, they store their meat, somewhere. So the question is, what innovations are going to occur in our society that need hunters? I mean, even in your medical case thing, I looked at the idea of thinking about radiology, and radiologies used to read scans or read x-rays or whatever, and they would send it overnight to India, and doctors there would do it cheaply and look through all the scans and say, this is what we see. And then the doctor would see it when it was sent back and do a look-see. The question is, that was one doctor and sending scans to India. Maybe it's the case that now doctors will look at things and their job is to see the unusual and send it to a super doctor who would then look and see whether there's something that was missed even then. So basically it'll increase efficiency. It is making it the case that how do we individualize again, and how do we allow for flexibility? And we need innovation. There's so many problems that occur as we age. As you said, there's medical issues. As we have the young, how do we create new ways of education? How do we create new ways in which they can grow? How do we create new ways in which we can govern, or societies can govern under things like global warming or CO2 and the idea? How can we think about growth in our society? How do we think about equity and ability to have people have more ability to create on their own and grow? So there's tremendous number of unsolved problems that are just sitting there waiting to be addressed in the areas. And so demographics, what if we have global warming? We're going to have huge migration from the south to the north. Who wants to live at 55C all the time? You just can't live in that area and in that region. So how do we handle the manufacturing of energy in the future? How do we get all of those are huge innovation problems that need to be solved. AI can be helpful in helping us do that, but who has the insights to see the differences and do things in a different way? That's an individual pursuit. That's the new hunting that's going to occur. How do we make manufacturing more efficient? How do we make building homes more efficient? How do we make our lives more efficient? How do we make our healthcare more efficient? How do we make transfer of ourselves to different regions more efficient?
One thing that, Myron, you spoke about, it's very passionately, is about robotics. So I was going to ask you if you can tell us how do you think AI can actually help improve robotics and in some sense apply robotics to different fields, right? You mentioned climate sustainability could be an example.
Well, for a robot, it's like a young child, so basically it needs to have basic skills. It has to have sensors on its arm. It has to be able to see things. It has to understand its environment around it. But a robot, which is a young child, it doesn't have domain specificity. It doesn't have a skill to do something in a particular domain. So we take an individual and you say, you go to graduate school now, or you go to technical school and learn how to run this machine and do it efficiently. You now have domain specificity. So you start off with a general robot and then you have domain specificity. So what we have is a luxury with robots, however, unlike human beings, is we tend to be born with a set body shape. Now I'm very weak, and when you ask me to lift a huge thing, I can't do it. So basically, what we did was develop technology in the past, which allowed me to then use machinery to put things on pallets, and then I don't have to do that. But we are now designing or thinking of robots as humanoid robots, and that may work for certain tasks, but basically the humanoid robot is only one form that a robot could take. When we had the rover that went to the moon, NASA did not send a humanoid robot. They sent one on wheels, to go over the moon's surface, or tractor treads or whatever to go on the moon's surface. So the robots of the future AI is being used now to develop robot brains or humanoid robots to train them like you would train young children, but not really to have domain specificity at this moment. Now, the problem is that when you use AI, which increases speed and allows you to program, allows you to build the digital twin and have flexibility and simulation, as I talked about before, then to put it into a physical process, that is done with a specific robot in mind. The future is going to be to have a robot designed for the task, and then have the AI and the software, the brain, work with that particular task in mind. What is the solution you want the robot to be built for, as opposed to the general robot? A lot of mistakes that are being made currently because of my thinking about exceptions and domain specificity, the mistake is that you have people believing you can build a general robot to do everything, while no one would build a general human being to do everything. That is complete waste of economics. It's a complete waste of money, to do that. So that's a dead end. What you want to think is the task first. What solution do I want to have? Then use AI to help you build that faster, and then being able to do it more flexibly. So the idea of having a design of a robot, maybe you need a robot to be in the countryside. Maybe you need one with tractor treads. Maybe you need one to be a dog, like Boston Dynamics is building dogs to do things. or, you want it to deliver packages. I don't know whether you want it to be dogs or you want it to be tractor treads or something else. But basically, we will have different forms. So the idea of thinking about what the robot gives me the illustration of is you want to know, what are you trying to solve? Then you use AI to solve that problem. You build a simulator, you build the model, you have the errors in the model. You use AI to try to reduce the error of your model. You use information from the world to reduce the error of your model. And the brilliance of the robot and designing it correctly with AI software and a digital twin is you need to think about how to marry that together with a co-pilot. The idea that AI will give, if there's something the robot doesn't, a new thing the robot hasn't seen before, it has to know when to ask for help. It has to know, I don't understand this. Help me, train me, give me more information. Always knowing that the last exception is only one of the exceptions that it'll see, and there'll be myriad other exceptions along the way, which it has to keep learning and to become more expert in the domain that it's involved in, with always the realization in building robots or systems that they will have failures that they have to address, and they'll have to garner new information to enable it to handle those situations. My joy in life will be able to see cars. They're all AI-assisted cars and all signal-assisted cars going around the Arc de Triomphe without any traffic jam. But my probability is 0 that that'll occur all the time. There will always be accidents that occur, because even with AI-assisted technology and creating this wonderful flow of cars going around without having any of the called whipsaw effect, where you have the whip in it and get a little bit of slowdown occurs, that basically it causes everything to slow down. And as a result of that, robots in the future will take over a lot of the tasks that we will see that we will do now. And basically they'll enable us to do things that we can't do now, and human beings are really not suitable to do now. Just the same way as when Milton Friedman went to China, when they showed him the farms in China early on in the 90s, early 90s, that basically the farmers were using trowels and hoes to be able to hoe the field. They said, why are you doing that, not using modern technology? They said, well, we have to keep these people employed. So he says, why don't use the trowels, or why don't you just use them not pitchforks or other things. Why don't you just let them use little spoons, and now you can employ more people. So the idea of marrying together new technology with our human power will create great value for us. And that's where I think robotics is going. There'll be a great assistant to do these things. And we'll learn a lot from designing robots and how we need flexibility in robots, how we need to handle the exceptions, how we use AI to speed up our processing and able to answer a question.
I think to your point about traffic in Paris and cars coming from Rome, I think I would assign a high probability that you're not going to solve the traffic in Rome with whatever best car you can come up with.
Well, maybe, I don't know.
Unless you teach those cars to actually break rules here and there, maybe that would work, but we'll see.
Well, that's the point, is that, basically when it's the case, does disorder, because the rules are so static and unchanging in Rome, that the Roman rules, or whatever they are, people say, well, these rules are so static and inflexible, we can create a better situation by changing them. Just the same way as Greg gets frustrated with his kids driving his car, he's at a stoplight, and basically he looks to his left and right. There's no cars coming, but he has to wait for the stoplight to turn green. There's no dynamics. It's a static system. So basically, he would like speed. He would like to think about his individual needs and crossing that street. And he would like to know about how technology can facilitate him doing it without wasting gas, sitting there, or his time, sitting there waiting to get his kids to the soccer game.
There's a lot of debate about AGI, so AI general intelligence, agentic AI, whether eventually there will be a role or not for humans. Maybe we can close on, do you think that, you hinted that you think there would be a role for humans, but maybe close on a positive note on what the role of humans will be.
Main question you're asking is AI takes many more jobs away, from people. We've always thought that innovation in our life would be, we would have machines or you would have new technologies, and that would work with individuals to increase productivity. There would be some substitution, but there'd be no work for those individuals in other activities if we displace some people through efficiency. But productivity made we have output faster, more individualized, and more satisfying the demands of others, and that increased productivity. So the issue is there's always the fear now under AI that the substitution will dominate the complementarity. Product labor and technology complements productivity, and everyone's better off. But there's also the substitution effect. So we have to think about our educational system and what we have to do to handle this new technology going forward, and how that's going to make it such that we can enhance the productivity and the use of new technology in new learning and ways of thinking about problems. That means we have to educate our young differently. We have to think about re-education process, how we educate those who are displaced to handle new things that we have and provide those. That'll come from the advent of this, and over time people will see new ways of doing things. I'm amazed at seeing some of the ways in which now we have new software that's been developed, or new ways to record things such as we're doing now with Riverside or other technologies that allow it to do it more flexibly and more efficiently, and new innovations that occur. How we can record notes, how we can make new mind maps from the notes, how we can have learning occurring. Should we allow AI in schools to do things that you can do your homework by AI? Maybe we should go back to the abacus and get rid of the calculator. I learned to do the abacus. I was pretty good at it, but I don't use the abacus anymore. I learned to invert matrices by hand, but now that's maybe a skill that was trained my mind, but it's not something I use right now. I use the computer. So there's obsolescence and innovation, and how individuals marry the innovation together with what they do to handle the new demands and new productivity invention that's going to occur. That's where our responsibility is to others who are the support mechanism, but we won't have generalized AI. Humans are too smart to do that, because I would think that if AI got too smart, then 100 humans would get together and beat the AI. Like the same way in chess, they found that basically when you played against the Grand Master, in chess, he can play 100 people individually. That if the 100 people got together in the swarm and figured out how to play, they would beat him, because the human being in combination would be richer than the information set of alone. So it's not Turing test, individual versus AI, can you distinguish? No, it's what we would do as individuals to use the AI to our advantage, to game against the AI, just the same way as the AI games against us.
I guess on that positive note, in favor of the humans, we can close the podcast. And thanks, Myron, for having joined us.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.